Welcome to Citizen AYNE, the podcast where the industries of sport and media intersect. Never before has it been so necessary to understand this symbiotic partnership as the entire content and entertainment sectors disrupt at pace, led by ever more ambitious moguls. The reference to the Orson Welles masterpiece is therefore no coincidence. The show is brought to you by our friends at 54, themselves at the forefront of change in so many sport formats and models. 54 brings a unique and proven capability to align capital, strategy and execution capabilities for investors, most recently in golf, polo and padel. 54 and Citizen AYNE, the perfect match.
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Thatcher. I just try everything I can think of. You know, Mr. Bernstein, if I hadn't been very rich, I might have been a really great man.
Don't you think you are?
I think I did pretty well under the circumstances.
Welcome once again to Citizen AYNE. I'm Roger Mitchell, and as always, I'm with the incomparable Mark Oliver. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, Roger. How are you?
I'm good. I'm not as flustered as you are getting back through the London traffic. And I was, in fact, looking just before I came on at the US Open, the golf. And it's one of these things, Mark, that I get confused every day more and more. It's on Sky here in Italy. But if I go onto the app of the tournament itself, I can watch featured rounds that for me is the same thing. And I just think that's a big theme these days. You know, what is exclusive, what's ubiquitous, and there's examples everywhere. So I'm looking forward immensely to our guest today.
Today we have Mike Darcey, a man who was the strategic brain behind Sky, B, then became its chief operating officer, and then moved on to be the CEO of News UK. Since then, he's done a lot of non-executive roles, including chairman of Arqiva, the distribution platform company. So a man who really knows about strategic thinking in the media and sport. Mike is someone who can best be described as probably my enemy for about 10 years. When I worked for everybody who was trying to do business with Sky, and so part of my job was to second guess what Mike might be thinking. I think part of the reason I thought I could second guess him is because we have the same background. We both started our careers as what one could call antitrust economists or something like that. The very refined and obscure world of competition policy and arguing cases for and against. So that's how I know Mike. And I guess given that background, I think the place I'd like to start with Mike really is the recent news that Mr. Murdoch wants to take the NFL to the competition authorities about, I don't know, for a better word, abusing their position as a very powerful sporting body to extract higher fees. I wonder what you think about that. And Mr. Murdoch now has turned around and, having once famously said, monopoly is terrible unless you have it. Maybe he's changed his mind, or maybe there's something else going on here.
Well, certainly for many of the years that I worked with Rupert and the rest of the Murdoch family, they tended to be on the other side of the regulatory debate. Certainly in the UK, for Sky, we were tending to have the regulator come after us, and so we were normally the defender, and generally in favour of less regulation rather than more. So there is a certain irony that Mr. Murdoch now seems to be, in the US at least, quietly and behind the scenes, asking for a bit of intervention, for a bit of help on the way the NFL licenses its games. I mean, I think the gripe is, he still operates a sort of mainstream broadcast network, and is a bit nervous that more and more of the NFL games are ending up on streaming, and that's presumably because they are finding that they can outbid some of those broadcast networks, and Rupert would quite like that to stop, please, or at least there'd be some limits put against it. The challenge is quite who's the regulator he's asking to intervene and exactly what are the grounds. But when you dig into what he's been saying, there are some very curious parallels with some of the arguments that we had in the UK in the past.
Sports bodies in the States are allowed to negotiate collectively, and in that respect, they are given an exemption from the usual rules on monopolies and competition. But that exemption only applied to their dealings with free-to-air TV, as I understand it. And the case is being made that doesn't really apply to their ability to negotiate collectively with streamers. I guess the implications of that would be if Mr. Murdoch got his way, is that the individual teams would end up having to negotiate with streamers for their rights, and only in free-to-air would they be able to collectively negotiate. Is that how you understand it, or am I missing something?
I think that's close. So the problem is this goes back to 1961, and this is an exemption that came about in the US at that point. And the problem is that in those days, there was no such thing as pay TV, hadn't been invented. So they didn't really talk about anything called free TV because there was nothing to contrast it with. So the language in the exemption actually only talks about sponsored telecasting. Nobody's actually quite sure what that means nowadays. And I think people are reasonably confident that it still means today that if the NFL is selling rights to people who are doing free-to-air broadcast, then that's probably okay. I don't think people really know if the exemption applies if they're selling to streamers. Is that sponsored telecasting? They run ads too. I'm not a US lawyer, so I don't know. But I think the best you could say is that there's ambiguity about what that exemption implies today. But even then, there's confusion at that point, because even if you say that the exemption doesn't apply, I mean, all it is a safe harbor. All it means is that today, if you think it applies, then they can't be sued for selling rights collectively. So if you think the exemption doesn't apply, then all that happens is that, well, somebody would then have to sue the NFL for selling rights collectively, and then the NFL would defend itself in court, saying, well, we have every right to sell collectively. There are very good objective reasons why we need to organize ourselves because, well, you need two teams to play a game, so there needs to be some coordination and so on, all the arguments we've heard for collective selling over the years. And they would remake all those arguments, and they might well win, in which case we'd sort of be back to where we started. And it will probably take very many years. And even if the NFL lost, then yes, you're in a situation where, okay, collective selling is no longer allowed. So what, you want the teams to sell independently? Well, I tend to think if that happened, then you'd be in a world where they'd probably even more likely to sell their rights to a streamer. And if you had the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs, going to market individually, I think they're going to sell to the highest bidder, and the people bidding the most at the moment would probably be the streamers. So it's a strange old threat. It's a very circular, sort of curious logic that says, I'd like more games on broadcast TV, so I'm going to threaten to undermine collective selling in order to get that. I think you're going to end up in the wrong place. So I'm not really quite sure what they think they're doing, but I think it's a bit more subtle than that. I think it's not really in the economics of antitrust. It's a bit more in the economics of politics, and see if they can get some politician to intervene and have a word with the NFL and suggest that maybe they could clarify their intentions and the like.
Can I ask something a little bit more terra, if I can say that, a little bit more, picks and shovels a little bit. We've all been through these 25 years of trying to find a way to protect the consumer, protect the fan, and, governments in the EU have come up with all kinds of antitrust things. You can't have one bidder and everything like that. Do you think that we're in a moment now where people are starting to ask, did all that really work? Did it achieve its objectives? Or would it have just be better? Would it be better if we just got back to one bidder that can just buy the whole lot and mean the fan doesn't have to buy 5 packages. Is that worm turning?
I definitely think that argument is coming back into fashion. Whether the worm actually turns or not is quite another matter. I mean, we have been around the houses on this. So in the UK, the antitrust concern was always about the Premier League rights and the strength that they gave Sky in Sky Sports. And then as an extension of that, because of vertical integration, the fact that the satellite platform might have had an advantage. And various regulators over the years had various ways to try and tackle that. Well, actually, they had 2 ways, and they kept sort of bouncing back and forth between the 2 ideas. So one idea was to sort of accept that these Sky Sports channels existed and try and intervene to sort of regulate the terms and prices at which they were provided at wholesale to other platforms. So to the cable operators and on digital in their time and later BT and the like. And the hope was that if you could get that right, then at least you could allow competition at the sort of platform and retailer level to flourish. And then sometimes the regulators will think, oh, yeah, but maybe that's not what we want. Maybe what we really want to do is go back upstream and intervene in the way rights are sold. And if we can bust the rights up a bit and get them in multiple hands rather than all in Sky Sports' hands, then we will end up with a multiplicity of sports providers and competition will flow from that. And that will also help competition at the sort of platform and retail level. And they bounced back and forth between those ideas multiple times over the years. I could take you through the timeline if you like, but it's pretty tedious. And it ran for a little over 20 years. There were many, 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 many years of regulating the wholesale price of Sky Sports, which largely came to nothing. An enormous amount of energy, intellectual and otherwise, was expended. There were many court cases, and really not a lot changed. In the early days, the OFT tried to take the Premier League and, by extension, Sky and the BBC to the Restrictive Trade Practices Court to try and ban collective selling, much like the argument that's going on in the US today. In the end, that failed. And in the end, it was the European Commission that first said, oh, I tell you what, Premier League, you have to break things up into packages. So they did that. Sky won all the packages, so they're a bit grumpier then. Then they realised that Sky was doing something called conditional bidding, which I might have to take personal responsibility for. So the next auction, they banned that as well. But that still didn't really work. And so they got the big hammer out and said, okay, enough playing around. We're just going to determine the outcome here. There are going to be multiple packages in Sky. You just can't win all of them. And that became known as the no single buyer rule. And so that's the world in which we had an enforced second winner of Premier League rights. Sky was not allowed to win them all. And that's how we got Setanta, and then later ESPN, and then BT, and now TNT and Amazon and all of those. That's how they all got in the game. So if you want to blame anyone for not being able to find out where the football game is on tonight, you have to go back to the European Commission in 2006. Because that's,
as you do for so many things, one could argue.
That's where it all started. And I remember sitting down at the European Commission and explaining, if you do this, you do understand that what will happen is that the consumer today, who currently tends to prefer to have all of it, will end up paying more, because they will want to have Sky Sports and they will want to have whoever this new player is. And it was all reasonably predictable. And the European Commission either didn't believe us or didn't care. And I think it might be the latter.
Definitely
because I think
the latter.
in the end they thought, well, yes, but not everybody wants all of it. And there are some who just want a bit and we want to provide for them. So you've got this argument in the industry which has been going on ever since. If you just want to satisfy the people who want everything, then you leave all the rights with one entity and you don't interfere in that. But if you want to preserve the possibility of smaller packages of sports rights, then you probably have to intervene, because there's quite a lot of natural tendency for it all to come together in one pot.
But Mike, is there now? This is the classic thing about antitrust, and push back if you feel that I'm not as good as you two at this stuff, but I have seen it in the music industry and what the the EU did around EMI. I think Warner trying to merge, and what they did with Microsoft. I tend to think that they get involved when it's already going to be sold by the market. You know, what does everything that you've just said about one place or not one place, how does that even matter in a world where football fans consume their content in so many different ways now? How does that even matter? Should we not just let the market do its job?
I think the argument would be that if there had been no intervention and the market had just been left to do its job, then there probably, in the UK, there might well just be Sky Sports. Or somebody had utterly displaced Sky Sports and been the new Sky Sports and come in with a very big checkbook and taken it all away. And it would be reasonably expensive, and it would perhaps not satisfy people who want a bit of sport in their life. And you know, to be fair to the regulators, you know, their intervention, you know, did mean that smaller bundles had an opportunity to emerge, which otherwise would have been difficult. It sort of worked for Sky in the end as well. I mean, that's the sort of awkward truth of it. We'd got slightly trapped in a world where we thought we had to have everything. The world thought we had to have everything. And so we were under pressure always to have everything. And if we ever lost anything, it was thought to be a total crisis. And then the European Commission intervened and we didn't have everything. And it wasn't our choice. And the world didn't end. The roof did not cave in. It was fine. And we actually gradually worked out, well, actually pretty quickly, that this was probably a better place. As long as we had, I don't know, 2/3 of it, 3/4 of it, we were still going to be the number one choice of sports fans. And it sort of took the pressure off that at the margin, you could lose the odd thing as long as in the next year you sort of nicked something back again. And the exposure, you know, sort of the downside exposure of something going wrong was much less. It was something you could manage. And we actually found the world a much more comfortable place to be. So, yeah, we are in this world where people say, I can't work out where the game is. And, oh, it's on BT or TNT or whatever. Or for a while there, it was on Amazon. And how do I even get Amazon? And so on and so on. But was the alternative a better place? I'm not entirely sure. I think most of these things are trade-offs. And you decide which sort of cohort of customers, you know, you're going to try and intervene in favor of. Some people definitely had a better experience from that intervention, some people less so. Mark, you were around for much of that. I mean,
I was going to add when the EC did get around to the packages option, but at one stage it did actually toy with the idea of allowing clubs the rights. And I remember I was working for Man United and Liverpool at the time, and there was a bit of a ding-dong with the league. But then there was a famous Gordon Brown intervention that basically said, no, you can't do that. It would ruin football, English football in particular, or Scottish football.
Well, there was this very strange phase in around sort of 2000, 99, 2000, 2001, where at the same time as Sky was furiously defending collective selling with the Premier League in front of the Restricted Trade Practices Court, we were all running around buying 10% stakes in football clubs. We and NTL and Granada and various other people, because we thought, yeah, but it might be about to break up to individual selling and wouldn't be good if we had 10% stakes in all these people, then we'd be in prime position.
So I was running around too, Mike. I was chasing around Granada.
Hedging their bets as to where this was going to end up.
And of course, they stopped Sky buying Man United, which sparked it all off.
That was the beginning. We were told we had to sell down from that one.
Because the leading pay TV provider could not own the largest club, because it will give an unfair advantage in the bid for rights, because they get the money back, if you know what I mean, from the largest club.
I remember very well. It was referred to as the toehold theory, which I thought was a load of rubbish, but there you go.
Doesn't seem to have applied in France with B&O in PSG, does it?
Hasn't stopped anybody else anywhere in the world. It was only in little old England where the toehold theory apparently held sway.
And you could argue that Man United might have been better off had Sky been their main shareholder, given what's happened in the last 20 years.
Personally, I think that was a bullet dodged on Sky's part. I think it would have been an absolute nightmare if we'd been the owner of one of the Premier League clubs.
Let me ask from the point of view of all these poor people out there either rights holders or even consultants and advising rights holders about how they now set out their packages for tender. And it's all under this legal framework that what you can do and what you can't do. I feel really sorry for them, because it's hard enough already as the media market has become much less rich, less able to bid for things, less marginality, and working out who's going to bid and what they would bid for, and would they bid for everything, or do they only want the big events? And there's always a feeling out there, and maybe this is a separate little discussion for later, there's always a feeling out there that we're a little bit at the end of days around the pay model. You know, you hear phrases all around these days, people want great storytelling, but they don't want to pay for it. You know, how do you help all of these people get through of all of this when, you know, there's some regulator that says, yeah, do your tender and all that one. By the way, you do have to grant access to the losers. You know, what's that all about? That's all really hard, Mike.
I'm going to have to disagree with some of the premise, because I don't feel like we're at end of days for the pay model and sports rights. If anything, I think that looks as strong as ever. I mean, I get the entertain me, but I'd rather not pay. I think you see that in the growth of, you know, the sort of ad-supported tiers of streaming. But if there is one, but I would put that down to an enormous oversupply of drama and entertainment content. And funnily enough, when a market is hugely oversupplied, you tend to drive the price down. I think sport is the main bastion against that, and that it retains that sort of, you know, huge level of distinctiveness and inability to replicate. And so I think it is the one that's holding its value. And for the people still in the pay space, it's the one thing that they can rely upon, that, you know, they can afford and they can outbid the free-to-air guys as a general rule, and still make a decent buck from it. So I think the pay model still largely holds sway there. I think you see some rights owners finding themselves on the outside of that, but that's not because the pay model is struggling. It's more going back to this sort of epiphany in 2006 that some of the pay guys have worked out that, look, sports rights are great. We just don't need all of it. So once you've got enough, the next one that comes along, you're probably not going to put a lot of money on the table for it. And if you happen to be that rights owner that turns up and everybody's got enough, then you got a bit of a problem, and you may well end up on free to air. But I think the likes of Sky and others around the world, they've still got plenty of money to outbid the free to air guys. And look, there's this. Sometimes they take one package of everything to market. Sometimes, I've been involved in a couple lately where they produce the most extraordinary grid of different things that you have to bid for. And then sometimes they actually stick to it. But more often than not, you fill out the grid and then the conversation, the real conversation starts. And then it's like, okay, so what do you really want?
Let's have a wee arm wrestle on the pay model thing, Mike. Because I take all the points about sport is the last bastion, it's the only thing live, it's not replicable. I get all of that. Of course, I get all of that. Let's take two specific examples. One is France and one is the country I live in, Italy. I think one would be very hard pushed to say that the pay model still works for football in this case in France. And I'll talk more about Italy. In Italy, Sky Italia, part of your old organisation, I think did what you talked about earlier. They did the numbers. They realised that the churn wouldn't be so big if they didn't have Serie A, because they had all the other entertainment formats like X Factor, like MasterChef, and they decided the number that they would bid and no more, and they basically pulled out of Italian football, leaving Serie A now, I would argue, with only one potential bidder, which is the Zone. And would you like to be in the position, Mike, as head of Serie A, when your only real potential bidder is a company that's lost all that money over these recent years and is trying to get out of every deal that costs it cash flow. Is that a model that's still working?
I mean, that doesn't sound like it is working, no, but I think you have to diagnose why they are where they are.
Piracy.
I think piracy is a factor in all pay TV discussions, and we could disappear down that rabbit hole. But if you put that to one side, because it's everywhere, but you have quite different outcomes. I mean, say in France, you go to the particularities in France, and you have a rights owner there in Ligue 1 who just got well ahead of themselves, over the tips of their skis, as some people would say, an inflated sense of their own importance and value. They took advantage of the loyalty of their principal buyer over many, many years, Canal Plus, really did a number on them. And Canal Plus has taken that very personally and said, we're not going to be treated like that, and think you can come back and we'll pay a sum of money. So Maxime Sada there is hanging them out to dry in a very substantial way. Maybe that'll come back together again. But yes, in the meantime, you've had DAZN who have tried. And look, okay, so here's the next problem. DAZN have tried in several places to run a pay proposition based on one property. I think there's plenty of economics that will tell you that is not going to work well. That the most efficient model for a sports business is a multiplicity of sports, because most sports fans like quite a lot of different sport to some degree, so the bundle works well. So DAZN has gone down a path of trying to sell a single sport proposition, and not surprisingly, it didn't really work as well as they'd hoped. So they've given up as well, and now you're left with Ligue 1 doing itself, and also trying to run a single sport proposition, and not surprisingly, I don't think that will work. So the answer was, don't piss off Canal Plus in a big, big way about 8 years ago, or however long it was. That was that's the original sin in France. It's not that the pay model is broken, but I think that some people made some very poor choices. And they have sort of messed up their own market in a way that doesn't apply, say, in the UK. I think in Italy, you've got a bit going on there where, and I think the Premier League has put these other European leagues under an enormous amount of pressure by how successful it has been, both domestically and on the world stage, and the amount of money it's generating. This is a market for talent in the end. And the more money the Premier League makes, the more problems it causes for these other European leagues. And they've tended to try to respond to that by just claiming that their rights are worth more than they in fact are. And then when they don't get the bids that they would like, they make poor choices out of desperation to try and get a different outcome. And it has messed up a few of those markets. But I don't think that's intrinsic to the pay model. It's a factor when the pay model is done poorly.
And to pick up your point about the Premier League being a kind of role model and having done very well, the virtuous circle of top pay income in the domestic market, then improving the quality of the product itself, getting the best players in the world to come to the Premier League, becoming attractive globally, kind of virtuous circle the Premier League finds itself in that the other leagues struggle to match.
I don't think just finds themselves in. I think they thought very deeply about it. They worked very hard, and it's been very deliberate.
No, it's being unfair there.
They're lapped by accident.
They played it well, and they never wanted to annoy Sky, having been on both sides of that fence. There was a definite thing that they're the people who help create us, so we don't want to shut them out. So they didn't do a Canal Plus like they did in France.
But Sky also hasn't taken advantage of them.
No, well, as you know, in 2003, it was the only bidder, more or less.
And we pretty much knew that, but you take the view, you look for the long term, and you don't take advantage of the fact you're the only bidder.
Yeah, and I think that was appreciated by the league at the time. But let's talk about some other sports where has pay TV, have they used it as wisely? Let's talk about cricket, because I think you may have been at Sky Still where cricket went completely pay TV on Test matches in 2006.
Absolutely, I was.
Yeah.
Very much part of that.
Do you think that's been a totally positive story for cricket, especially Test match cricket, doing that? Or do you think and especially looking forward, do you think they're going to... They've chipped away a bit at the the free-to-air model, obviously more highlights than the 100. Do you think that's a sport where, in terms of pay TV broadcasters having enough, they've learned that they can do without things, that's the sport that needs to rethink things now? Or do you think they're still on the right trajectory?
Personally, I think they're pretty close to being on the right trajectory. I think they'd be in a very parlous state if they hadn't gone down that path and stayed with that. So I think Sky's paying about £220 million a year now for the ECB contract. I think that's the number that's most typically referred to. That's a lot of money compared to what cricket used to be paid. That's a lot. And of course, a lot of the value in cricket nowadays is actually in the ICC contract. It's the T20, ICC T20 Worlds and the ODIs and all of that and various other things. So the 220 is just for the sort of ECB home test matches and ODIs with the visiting teams and the rest. That's a lot of money. I mean, if they walked away from that, they might lose 90% of their TV income. That order of magnitude. Who else is going to, let's go back to 2006 and put all the test matches on Channel 4. They're going to pay a tenth of that. Just
to dig on that a bit, it's the hybrid model. Because, of course, just before that, Sky had one test, as you probably remember. It was rather odd. And obviously in Formula One, another asset, there was a sharing of pay and free for a while.
I designed that sharing.
And now it's gone completely pay. Do you think that move from sharing to completely pay, firstly, is that good for the pay operator? Clearly you thought it was, being there at the time. Has it proved to be good for the sport? Do you think hybrid models work? We talked about people having to get several different pay packages to get, but also there's a certain confusion when some things are on free-to-air and some things are on pay TV. Do you think hybrid might come back again? Or do you think pay will be able to pay for exclusivity?
I think that there is more prospect of hybrid coming back in. And I think you've seen that in the cricket, in the sense that at the margin, Sky was happy for the BBC to be involved in the 100 and for them to have some of the live content. I mean, you're right, we tend to get drawn to extremes. If it all went free to air, it would be a revenue catastrophe for the ECB. I would have thought that would probably be the end of Test cricket in itself, because I would have thought they would be unable to keep any of the best players in the game. They would all be off just playing T20 franchise cricket around the world, and you never see them for dust, because they just wouldn't have the money to maintain those contracts. I mean, I think it's a bit, I've heard this a lot, but I just think it's crazy to say that, sort of going with Sky has caused a problem in the last 20 years. I think you look at the test match cricket in England at the moment, it looks pretty strong as a product in terms of its viewing, in terms of its attendance. There are only a couple of other countries in the world where test cricket is as strong. So it'd be hard to say, because they went behind the paywall, it's weakened. It looks in pretty good shape. Could they live? I could imagine a hybrid world in which a test was on free-to-air. But I think where you started was a hybrid the other way around, in which Sky had one test and most of it was on. So if you want a 90-10 hybrid or a 10-90 hybrid, I think you've got to be clear which one it is. I always used to joke with the BBC when we did several joint bids over the years for things that tended to be the FA Cup, as far as I can remember. And the BBC always joked that they liked doing joint bids with Sky. The idea was that we paid all the money and they got all the rights. And that is what most people, in the end, when they examine their conscience, are really saying when they talk about a hybrid deal. Can we please have all of Sky's money, but can we put all the rights on free TV? So I just think you have to be a bit more realistic than that. If you're talking about like 90-10, and I might call this the Lib Dem solution, and I'll get to why in a minute. But, would the Sky business model collapse if one test per year was deemed necessary to be on free TV and one day international? Probably not. And I call it the Lib Dem option because this is actually what they suggested a couple of years ago when they tabled a motion for an expansion of the listed events regime. And look, there would have been a time when Sky was building where that would have been a deal breaker. I'm not sure it would be now. There would be consequences. They would pay less because they had a less exclusive product. But I don't think they'd pay catastrophically less. And it may well be that the ECB might say, well, we'll take, a chunk less money, but we would see some value in having a test match and a one-day international on free-to-air TV. I think that's plausible. I don't think the world collapses that way. But if you want it 90-10 the other way around, then yeah, I think the revenue collapses.
This is so important for me because this is the media arm wrestle that I've been talking about for 4 or 5 years now. Remember what I said about Sky Italy not bidding for Serie A and why they didn't do that. Let's assume I'm a hairy American CFO from Comcast and I go to Sky UK and I say, what the hell are you doing paying what you called a huge amount of money to the ECB for a product, Test Cricket, that with audiences is becoming almost irrelevant? Nobody else is going to pick it up anyway at the value, half that bid tomorrow. What would you push back on me if I really didn't care and I just came in and said, we've lost 40% of our share price in the last 3 years in Comcast. I don't care about it. Half the bid, and if they don't accept it, I don't care.
I'd say, mate, if you're worried about your Comcast share price, I'd sort out your fibre business in the US and stop worrying about us in the UK. Sort out your own backyard first. Look, I could Sky get away with paying a bit less and nobody would take it off them? Like, I think that's always a case that Sky has to grapple with. But as Mark pointed out, look, there is sometimes value in being loyal to your partners and not taking advantage in a short-term period of, when you might have them vulnerable. And I think it's brave to say, look, there's nobody else out there. I think the UK is a very attractive market. And if somebody wanted to get involved and Sky started to take liberties with how much it was paying for cricket, I think it could well end up somewhere else. It may not happen immediately, but in time, that could happen.
What would the Sky churn be if that happened? You walked away from the ECB contract. What percentage do you lose?
Well, I think it's quite a complicated one. And the key thing about cricket you have to remember is that it's the key summer tentpole. So a lot of the money is spent on football, obviously, and that runs for, sort of 8-9 months a year. And Sky has a real particular need, because it's a subscription broadcaster, to try and hold people through the summer, because it is really, really expensive if people drop away at the beginning of May and then you have to re-recruit them all in August or September as the football season starts. It is much better if you have a summer offering, and the combination of ECB and Formula One are the key tentpoles there that bridge you across the summer and hold that subscriber pool in place. So look, I'm not going to try and do a spreadsheet in my head here. But the answer is I think they pay quite a lot to keep that subscriber base. And it's a combination of, look, who might you lose because the cricket is one of the most important things? And who might you lose for the summer that you then have to regain each year? And I think, yeah, they quite happily pay significant sums for that. That's sort of why the pay model continues to outbid free, because there's a lot of value in keeping people in that subscription relationship.
Yeah, Mike, I get that. What I'm saying is I think broadcasters now think exactly the way you're thinking about churn and the summer and everything like that. What you mentioned earlier is also correct. I think the link with sport and entertainment is very, very helpful as glue and anti-churn. But in a world, Mike, where our friends in the biggest sport in the world, I'm leaving America out for a second, soccer, are talking about World Club competitions, about World Cup every 2 years. I wouldn't be basing my sports strategy on we're the sport of the summer and they need to have us because otherwise they churn. I think the summer's going to get filled up with the main sport or other things like Formula One or tennis is getting bigger, things like that. I just feel this idea that all sports need to be bought for loyalty or for the summer thing. I think we've entered a world of the hairy CFO, and they're coming for all of those rights spreadsheets and saying half them.
Oh, I think the CFO's been in charge for 20, 25 years. I mean, I think the work that we did at Sky, with the data we had, was pretty detailed. We're not bidding on emotion back in 2000,
no,
2005.
Of course not.
We were doing very sophisticated analysis.
Yeah, but the media sector was a lot healthier, Mike. You've got to give me that. The media sector was a lot healthier. We were not making it up.
It was the CFO then.
No, you weren't.
Was signing off the bids. It was based on the numbers, and it was based on a very keen understanding of the subscriber model and how that worked. What I think you're observing, I mean, there's a couple of things you're observing there. What I think you're observing is that sports and sports rights owners are no longer passive. They're no longer just sitting there watching the world around them and saying, hey, I've got this sport, how much do you want to bid? They're thinking very hard about the competition between sports, because they have worked out that the pay guys don't want everything. So it is a bit of a constant rolling beauty parade, because you want to be in the in club, the set of rights that the pay broadcaster wants to own and feels is enough to retain their base. So what do you do for that? Well, you do ask yourself questions about, am I in the right season? Is it right to go head to head with football, or should I get out of the way of that? Should I become a summer sport? Various sports have done that. Do I need to simplify my sport? Do I need to make it more accessible to a wider audience? Do I need to innovate in new formats? And cricket has done that extensively, from Test cricket to ODIs to T20s and all the rest. All the sports are running around asking themselves, how do I make myself more attractive? Because not everybody is going to get the big bucks. You're right. But so how do I make sure that I'm in the in crowd and I am the one getting the big bucks, and it's somebody else who's the one who doesn't quite make the grade and gets shunted out and told, bad luck, you're on free TV because nobody in pay TV wants you?
Can we go back, Mike, to Mr. Murdoch again, and maybe Murdoch Jr. rather than Murdoch Sr.?
There are a few of those.
I know, but the one that's running the show, or sort of, is Fox buying Roku in the... Well, I say in the States, because they bought it internationally, but it's a big player in the States.
It's overwhelmingly a US player, yeah.
What do you see the logic is in that? Obviously, it's a $22 billion price. Way back when, I think B-Sky B and News Corp had small shareholders in Roku and sold them. What's the thinking about where that takes you in the States?
Yeah, I mean, I think they might be two slightly different questions, because they're very different points in time. I mean, I'll go back to the original engagement with Roku, because, I mean, that was very much at the tail end of my time at Sky, but I've got a reasonable sense of what was happening. I mean, the overwhelming priority there was, from Sky's point of view, it was operational. That Sky was launching Now TV at the time. It's sort of internet streaming bundle, initially around sort of movies and entertainment, but expanded to sport. And, the sense that, well, there was a long argument at Sky for quite a while as to, look, can we just stick that up on the internet and other devices like, Xboxes and things like that, and will that find a market? But there was a counter argument that said, no, I think we're going to need a box. I think we're going to need a Now TV box, because there just aren't enough smart TVs out there yet. Maybe in 5 years' time, we can just rely on everybody having a smart TV connected to broadband, and if we integrate into those smart TVs, everything would be fine. But that's not true today. So we need a box. We need a Now TV box. And Roku was the speed to market answer to that challenge. So there was a commercial deal done with Roku, which basically said, can we have basically a stripped down Roku box as is? We want to slightly, constrain the functionality so it doesn't give access to the whole world. And we want to call it a Now TV box. And so that was the key deal that was done. So there was a Now TV box, and then there were several generations of Now TV boxes over the years. And around that time, there was this News Corp investment into Roku. And Sky did follow on with that. I was very much somebody thinking about just the commercial deal. I didn't particularly have any interest in being an equity holder in Roku. Somebody did. I think it was probably a stronger motivation out of News Corp. I think John Miller joined the Roku board at the time. So I think it was very much a News Corp-led thing, and we sort of tagged along. But as I say, the important piece to us was speed to market for a Now TV box. Later that all sort of moved on. Once everybody had a smart TV, it became operationally burdensome to have a Now TV box, and it simply wasn't necessary anymore. So that was all phased out, I don't know, around 2020 probably. And Sky was just happy to rely on all the other interfaces that were out there, all the smart TVs and everyone else. And
do you think now Murdoch is up for the fight that Roku's going to have with Amazon Fire Stick, Android TV, and even Walmart actually in the States for the connected TV, smart TV market? Or do you think they've bought a good player because Roku actually is the clear market leader and that will have benefits?
I'm still trying to get my head around this deal, to be honest. Well, as I think the market is, given that their share price is down about 25% in a week. So, look, maybe some people think it's a good idea. They just pay too much. Or maybe some people don't think it's a good idea. I think as far as I've got at the moment is, look, it's, in one sense, for me, this is a reminder of two fundamental things that you need to always understand about Rupert and then now Lachlan. And the first one is, look, deep down, they're advertising guys. That's where they came from. That's the business model they love. It is about having reach, and it's about having a proposition out there that, hopefully relatively cheaply can gather, eyeballs, as many eyeballs as you can, and your ultimate customers are the advertisers. That's the world they come from. That's the newspaper world. And in that sense, Sky's a bit of an aberration. I mean, it was always, slightly odd that they got so, we tend to think of them in this country as a PTV business. It's not actually where their instincts lie. And they've got out of that, and they got out of DirecTV, and they got out of Foxtel, basically. And you look at what Fox is now, and it's basically a bet that advertising is a good place to be, as it always was. And
do you think Roku is part of that? The Roku's ad tech stack and so on is part of that?
I think it reflects that's the, they're not going out there. They've decided they don't want to spend lots of money, on very expensive content and trying to acquire subscribers to it. Mainly they want to sell ads against things. So you look at Tubi and these various, where they've placed their bets in recent years, it is all about the view that they want to be advertising players. So I think you've got that. You've got a reversal to that, which is sort of like a return to the natural order of things for the Murdoch family. And I think, the other thing is it's a reminder that it's really just the US that matters to them. I think they've largely lost interest in the UK, largely lost interest in Australia. And they, that happened over several years. And they've largely got out of much of that. And really, it's just about the US. So I think they don't mind that Roku realistically is pretty much a or a very marginal player outside of the US.
Pursuing the advertising theme, obviously, once you talk about advertising and TV in the future, you immediately think about YouTube as being this monolith of advertising and TV in the future. And then the prospect that people can cover sports on YouTube or platforms like it and create a pretty good advertising business. And I'm thinking, obviously, of Goalhanger and Overlap and the kind of recent interest in these add-on coverage, which Netflix has taken on board for the World Cup. And I'm asking you because, of course, people may not know this, but you were a pathfinder in this, and that you bought clip rights for The Sun many years ago on the basis that there was this kind of sports coverage clips market way ahead of your time that was going to be of value. And do you think they'll push into that area of the market as well? Obviously, in terms of the vodcast, and the ad dollars around that.
I'm not sure how that links to the Roku play. I mean, I think the Roku play is much more about, look, they're on whatever it is. Yeah, they are the interface on 25%, something like that, of TVs in the US. And it gives them a chance to be a bit of a gatekeeper, clip the ticket on the SVODs that are sold there, get a few ad slots in some of those into the bargain, monetize the ad space in the interface itself, and run their own ad-funded channels on there.
I agree. It's probably something different. I suppose I was thinking the two you said about the Murdochs about advertising, they're also about journalism. And that's in the blood too. The thing with the Sun and the clips, and in fact the clips are used at the Times and everything else as well, that was what I would call one of Rupert's little aberrations, where he had a little period where he wanted to go down the path of paid for news. And he thought that was the model. And I think that's still, that's worked out pretty well for many people. There's some quite strong models out there that have, worked behind a paywall, and the Times has been, very successful in that regard. And look at the New York Times and, But isn't the future of the Sun?
FT.
Isn't the future of the Sun?
Though,
isn't that a podcaster of the future?
Yeah, look, I think it's a multimedia, but he went off the idea of getting people to pay for it, because in the end, he wanted the reach back, and he didn't want to constrain the reach, and the desire for reach won over, an argument over what was the better business model for the long run. So he was happy for the Times to stay behind the paywall, but the Sun, no. Do these things start to come together? Yeah, look, I think, we were trying to build, when it was in fashion, a news model that was worth paying for. And you needed points of differentiation. You needed more engagement just than the news headlines that everybody already knew. And video clips, we thought could play a role in that. I think it's interesting, you look at what Netflix is doing now, though, with Goal Hanger and the rest. And the curious thing is that there are no clips. I don't really get it. That's the bit I get stuck on. It's a bloke sat around a table with a glass of wine chatting about football, which is sort of fine. And I did tune in a few times to try and make sure I understood what the proposition was. But I did sort of slightly naively think, look, I know they haven't got primary rights, but is there some kind of like news access clips or something?
FIFA did that. FIFA did the deal with YouTube, didn't they, for the 10-minute clips, and made YouTube a partner. So they got some money out of YouTube. The
first 10 minutes, isn't it?
Yes,
which is a slightly different thing.
But Goal Hanger in the UK has done a deal for Premier League clips, hasn't it? In the UK, they will be having a mini match of a day with mini clips. I think that's what they do.
Oh, okay. Well, so that's good. But Netflix have done that, and they've tried to make a show with no footage at all.
Yeah, well, Mike, I would say that the last 5 minutes, you talking about the Roku deal, would be my ultimate arm wrestle with you to say that the pay TV model is on its way out. For the reason you said, and, Rupert Murdoch, the Citizen Kane of his day, understands that it's going back to advertising. You need to control the smart TV. I
think, though, what the Roku deal is telling you is that ad-funded is a pretty good way to monetize some reasonably low-rent content and some library content that, the industry, created over the last 50, 60 years and is sitting around in various libraries. That is a very efficient model. We used to do that. It used to be the channels, way down the EPG on the Sky box, but now we do it on Tubi and things like that. That is not a model that is going to be building the next House of the Dragon or anything like that, or any big, new, expensive show. That's coming out of the paywall nowadays. So I don't think Rupert and his ad model is going to be competing in that world. So I think people are saying, look, he's bought himself a spot in the streaming space, but you'd never call Roku a competitor to Netflix. They're not going to be... all through my career in television, I always come back to, but who's actually going to make the new content? What's the business model that's going to make the new content? And I don't think it's going to be Roku.
No. Mike, let's wrap up with the question of our sponsor, 54. We talked about YouTube there, and YouTube has completely changed the dynamics of what you were just talking about. Who makes content that is watched? What's your reaction to the government, coming back to the antitrust thing at the start? It's legal, it's not antitrust, to banning YouTube, or all social media, but in this case, YouTube, in the UK. How dramatic is that?
Well, they definitely want it to be dramatic. They want it to be a big statement. It looks like something out of the file of, something must be done, or at least be seen to be done. But we have to be seen to try.
It's a Dangerous Dogs Act of 2026, isn't it?
Yeah, they've got to do something. But I think it might be even smarter than that. Look, I think it's going to be pretty tough. I happened to be traveling in Australia when they brought in theirs. And the commentary, was, great for trying. We all know how resourceful teens are. Is this really going to work? And it didn't take long for the evidence to, mount that it's actually quite hard to make this stick. Are we going to do any better? Maybe there are lessons to be learned. Maybe we can tighten it up. I am a little bit doubtful. I always get drawn to the parallel of piracy, which we mentioned before. I mean, piracy has been with us for 30 years, and some very smart technologists all around the world have been trying to stop it. And I think if we've learned anything, and that would be, do not underestimate the resourcefulness of a teenager who wants to get into something that they want to get into. We've really had a lot of trouble trying to sort of shut this down. But I think the attraction is that the politicians make a law, and then when it doesn't work, they've got a ready-made scapegoat. They get to blame the evil US social media companies, and it's all their fault for not trying hard enough. So it's like the Dangerous Dogs Act, but with somebody to blame when it doesn't work, and not just the dogs.
But in the meantime, Mike, we are in an industry that for 5 years now has been saying, you need a YouTube strategy. You've got to think about what you're doing. And then overnight, they've been told, you can't reach anybody under 16. I think that's pretty dramatic.
Is YouTube
whether
on
it works
the
or
list?
not.
YouTube is on the list, although they're trying to say they shouldn't be on the list. I think that's one of the issues about who's on the list, especially new players emerge. Are they on the list or not? And I think for some sports, if they introduce some kind of social type functionality, or groups
isn't there a YouTube Kids even?
Yeah, there is, yes. But I think
YouTube Kids going to be on the list?
That's not, I think. But also, if sports start to introduce a bit of social functionality on their web offerings, do they get told they can't offer that to under 16s? Is it the platform or the functionality which is not to be allowed?
Or is that really a social network? And this is the YouTube argument. Hey, we're not actually a social network. And I think BBC would say if we put clips on it, doesn't make us a social network, so please don't ban us. As I say, go back to the earlier conversation. I think regulating the media is really, really, really difficult. There are some very, very powerful forces in play here, always. It is wickedly complicated. And I think you have... Look, I understand why they have concerns with the current way the world is and the problems that arise. But we've often had those concerns, and it doesn't mean there's a good answer for how to regulate it. Because behavioral regulation is extremely hard. And it's very hard to get it right. And the unintended consequences could be serious. And I suspect it's unenforceable. And I have some doubts about the wisdom of putting in place a law that you can't enforce, or maybe even worse, actually have no intention of even trying to enforce because you can't.
Yeah. Mike, listen, I can't thank you enough on behalf of me and Mark. I found this last hour to be truly educational. You learn more from people that you probably don't agree with fully, because it makes you challenge your own thoughts. I found this amazing, and I can't be more grateful for you giving us this hour to come on Citizen AYNE. Thank you very much, Mike Darcey.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.